Story 1. The Christmas Day Disappearance. The Fletcher family had gathered at their grandparents' farmhouse in rural Nebraska for Christmas 2014. It was a tradition that had continued for over 30 years, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren converging on the property where patriarch Harold Fletcher and his wife Dorothy had lived since 1967. The farmhouse sat on 240 acres of land, most of it fields that Harold had leased to other farmers after retiring from active agriculture in 2005. On Christmas morning, December 25, 2014, 17 family members were present at the farmhouse. After opening presents and eating breakfast, the children were allowed to play outside in the snow while adults prepared Christmas dinner. Among them was 7-year-old Emma Fletcher, granddaughter of Harold and Dorothy, daughter of Mark and Susan Fletcher. Emma went outside at approximately 10:45 a.m. with her cousins, 5 children ranging in age from 4 to 11. The children were told to stay in the yard near the house, within sight of the windows. The adults checked on them periodically while working in the kitchen. At 11:17 a.m., Emma's mother, Susan, looked out the window to check on the children and noticed Emma was no longer with the group. Susan called out through the door asking where Emma was. The other children said she'd gone back inside to use the bathroom about 5 minutes earlier. But Emma wasn't inside. Susan checked the bathroom, the bedrooms, every room in the house. Emma was nowhere to be found. Within minutes, all 17 family members were searching, calling Emma's name, checking every possible hiding place in the house and the immediate yard. Emma had vanished. The timeline was impossibly narrow. She'd been outside with her cousins, had reportedly said she needed to use the bathroom, and had disappeared in the approximately 5 minutes between leaving the yard and Susan noticing her absence. Mark Fletcher called 911 at 11:34 a.m. reporting his daughter missing. Local police arrived within 20 minutes and began organizing a search. The temperature was 27 degrees Fahrenheit with snow on the ground. If Emma was outside and lost, she was in serious danger from exposure. She'd been wearing a winter coat but only light gloves and no hat. Search teams arrived throughout the afternoon. Volunteers from neighboring farms, police K-9 units, eventually even a helicopter with thermal imaging. They searched the 240-acre property systematically, expanding outward from the house in all directions. They checked every outbuilding, every piece of farm equipment, the barn, the grain silos, the machine sheds. No trace of Emma was found. No footprints leading away from the house. The yard was trampled from the children playing, but there were no small footprints leading into the fields or toward the road. No sign of disturbance. No evidence of anyone taking Emma or Emma wandering off. As Christmas Day turned into evening, the search took on desperate urgency. A 7-year-old couldn't survive a Nebraska winter night outdoors. The temperature was dropping toward 15 degrees. If Emma was outside, she would likely die from hypothermia before morning. The search continued through the night, dozens of volunteers with flashlights and searchlights combing every inch of the property. Christmas dinner sat uneaten in the farmhouse kitchen while the Fletcher family maintained vigil, praying for Emma's safe return. At 6:47 a.m. on December 26th, as dawn broke over the snow-covered fields, a volunteer searcher found something in one of the grain bins behind the farmhouse. The grain bin was approximately 100 yards from the house, part of a row of storage structures that had been searched multiple times the previous day. Inside the grain bin, buried under 3 feet of corn that remained from the previous harvest, was Emma Fletcher's body. She had suffocated in the grain, unable to escape once she'd fallen or climbed into the bin. The discovery raised immediate questions. The grain bin had been searched thoroughly on Christmas Day. Searchers had opened the access hatch and looked inside multiple times. They'd seen corn but no sign of Emma. How had they missed her? How had she ended up buried under 3 feet of grain? The coroner's examination revealed that Emma had died from asphyxiation, likely within an hour of disappearing. The grain had surrounded her as she'd moved, creating a quicksand effect that pulled her down until she couldn't breathe. It was a horrible way to die, and the knowledge that she'd been so close to the house that rescuers had searched the bin where she was dying was devastating to the family. But the forensic analysis revealed something even more disturbing. Emma's body showed evidence of having been moved after death. There were marks on her arms and torso consistent with being dragged or pulled. And the position of her body in the grain didn't match the pattern of someone who'd fallen or climbed in and been pulled under. Someone had placed Emma in the grain bin after she died. The investigation shifted from a tragic accident to a potential homicide. Police interviewed all 17 family members who'd been present at the farmhouse on Christmas Day. They examined alibis, looked for any evidence of family conflict or motivation for harming Emma. They found nothing. Every family member had been accounted for during the critical period when Emma disappeared. Multiple witnesses could verify where each adult had been. Investigators considered outside involvement. Had someone come onto the property, abducted Emma, killed her, and placed her body in the grain bin? But there were no vehicle tracks on the property aside from family vehicles. No footprints in the snow that couldn't be accounted for. The property was isolated, surrounded by empty fields. Anyone approaching the farmhouse would have been visible for a considerable distance. The forensic timeline made outside involvement seem impossible. Emma disappeared around 11:15 a.m. Her body was found at 6:47 a.m. the following day, but the body temperature and rigor mortis analysis suggested she died within an hour of disappearing, around noon on December 25th. That meant someone had taken her body and placed it in the grain bin within that first hour, while the family was beginning their search, while police were being called. Who could have done that without being seen? The farmhouse yard was full of people searching, calling Emma's name. The grain bin was visible from the house, yet somehow, someone had carried or dragged a 7-year-old's body 100 yards across open ground and placed it in the grain bin without anyone noticing. Unless they'd done it before the search began. Unless Emma had died somewhere else in those critical 5 minutes and someone had immediately hidden her body in the grain bin before anyone realized she was missing. Police conducted extensive forensic analysis of the farmhouse, looking for evidence of where Emma had actually died. They found traces of her presence in many rooms. She'd been playing throughout the house earlier that morning. But they found no evidence of a struggle, no blood, no signs of violence anywhere in the house. The case remains unsolved. Emma Fletcher's death is officially classified as undetermined, potentially accidental, potentially homicide, but without sufficient evidence to conclude definitively. The FBI investigated due to the suspicious circumstances but found no conclusive answers. The Fletcher family was destroyed by the tragedy. Mark and Susan divorced within 2 years, unable to cope with their grief and the unanswered questions about their daughter's death. Harold Fletcher suffered a stroke in 2016 and died in 2017, his last years haunted by what happened on his property. The family never gathered for Christmas again. The tradition that had lasted over 30 years ended on December 25, 2014. Various theories have been proposed over the years. Some investigators believe Emma's death was a tragic accident, that she climbed into the grain bin on her own, perhaps chasing a toy or exploring, and was pulled under before she could call for help. That someone in the family discovered her body and panicked, choosing to hide it rather than face accusations of negligence. Others believe Emma was killed by a family member for reasons that remain unclear, and the grain bin was chosen as a hiding place that might be interpreted as an accident. The moved after death evidence supports this theory, but the complete lack of motive or opportunity makes it difficult to identify a suspect. A darker theory, proposed by some who've studied the case, suggests Emma was targeted by someone outside the family who'd been watching the farmhouse, waiting for an opportunity. That this person somehow entered the property undetected, took Emma in those critical 5 minutes, killed her quickly and quietly, and placed her body in the grain bin before disappearing. But this theory requires accepting that someone could commit such an act in broad daylight, on property full of people, without leaving any trace or being seen. The truth of what happened to Emma Fletcher on Christmas Day 2014 may never be known. What is known is that a 7-year-old girl left her cousins to use the bathroom and never returned. That she died horribly, suffocating in grain just 100 yards from her family. That someone moved her body after death, placing it in a location that would be searched multiple times before being found. And that every family member who was present that day lives with the knowledge that someone among them, or someone who was never identified, knows exactly what happened in those 5 minutes when Emma vanished. Someone who has kept that secret for over 10 years, who has allowed the Fletcher family to be destroyed by grief and suspicion, who has never faced justice for whatever role they played in a 7-year-old's death. Christmas Day 2014 began with presents and laughter at the Fletcher farmhouse. It ended with a missing child and a search through freezing darkness. And it left behind a mystery that haunts everyone who learns about it. How can a child disappear from a house full of family, die within the hour, have her body hidden in plain sight, and no one know who's responsible? The grain bin where Emma was found has been demolished. The farmhouse has been sold to people who don't know its history. But the questions remain, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. And every December 25th, someone somewhere knows what really happened to Emma Fletcher. They know, and they've never told. That knowledge is their burden to carry, their secret to keep, their guilt to bear. Unless someday they decide to speak. Until then, Emma's death remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in Nebraska history. A Christmas Day tragedy that destroyed a family and left only questions in place of answers. Story 2. The theater fire. The Grand Vista Theatre in Louisville, Kentucky was showing a special Christmas Day marathon in 2016. All 3 Lord of the Rings extended editions back to back, starting at noon and running until past midnight. It was a tradition the theater had maintained for several years, attracting devoted fans willing to spend their entire Christmas Day in a movie theater watching 12 hours of Middle-earth adventures. 87 people purchased tickets for the Christmas Day marathon. They ranged in age from teenagers to senior citizens, united by their love of Tolkien and their willingness to spend the holiday in Theater 7, the Grand Vista's largest auditorium with 250 seats. The marathon began on schedule at 12:00 p.m. on December 25, 2016. Theater staff provided complimentary snacks and drinks throughout the day as a holiday gesture. The atmosphere was festive. Fans dressed as characters from the films, people who'd attended the marathon in previous years greeting each other like old friends. The shared experience of spending Christmas united by a story about fellowship and heroism. At 6:47 p.m. during the 2 towers, a fire broke out in the theater's projection booth. The booth was located at the back of the auditorium, a small enclosed room above the seating area where the digital projectors and sound equipment were housed. The fire started in the electrical system, sparked by wiring that had been installed improperly during a renovation 3 months earlier. The projection booth had a fire suppression system, but it had been disabled during the renovation and never properly reactivated. Theater management had failed to notice the deactivated system during their safety inspections, which were cursory at best. The fire spread quickly through the projection booth, feeding on the electrical equipment and spreading to the walls. Within minutes, flames had broken through the booth's walls into the ceiling space above the auditorium. The 87 people watching the film didn't notice immediately. The movie was loud, the scene on screen was dark, and the projection booth was behind them. By the time someone smelled smoke and turned around, flames were visible in the ceiling at the back of the auditorium. Someone shouted, "Fire!" and panic erupted. 87 people tried to exit Theater 7 simultaneously. The auditorium had 4 exits, 2 main doors at the back and 2 emergency exits on either side of the screen at the front. The emergency exits should have provided quick escape routes, but both had been chained shut from the outside. Theater management had chained the exits to prevent people from sneaking into other films without paying, a practice that violated fire codes but was common enough that management thought nothing of it. With the emergency exits blocked, all 87 people tried to exit through the 2 main doors at the back of the auditorium. But the fire was spreading across the ceiling above those doors, raining burning debris down on people trying to escape. The crowd bottlenecked, people pushing and shoving, trampling each other in their desperation to escape. Theater staff tried to help, tried to direct people to safety, but the smoke was overwhelming and visibility was near zero. The building's fire alarm system activated and sprinklers began flowing, but the water did little to slow the ceiling fire, which was burning through treated wood and insulation that resisted suppression. Emergency services received the first 911 call at 6:51 p.m., just 4 minutes after the fire started. Fire trucks arrived at 6:58 p.m., 7 minutes after the initial call. But those 7 minutes made all the difference. By the time firefighters entered the building, Theater 7 was an inferno. The entire ceiling had collapsed and the fire had spread to adjacent theaters through the connected ceiling space. Firefighters found dozens of people who'd made it out of Theater 7 but had collapsed in the hallways from smoke inhalation. Others were still trapped inside the auditorium, unable to reach the exits, overcome by smoke before they could escape. The final death toll was 32 people. 23 died from smoke inhalation. 9 died from burns or from being trampled in the panic to escape. All 32 people had been attending the Lord of the Rings marathon, had been in Theater 7 when the fire broke out. The 55 survivors suffered various injuries: smoke inhalation, burns, broken bones from being trampled or from falls during the evacuation. Many were hospitalized for weeks. Some suffered permanent lung damage from the smoke. Others were left with PTSD, unable to enter movie theaters or enclosed spaces without experiencing panic attacks. The investigation into the fire revealed multiple failures that turned what should have been a manageable emergency into a deadly catastrophe. The improperly installed wiring that sparked the initial fire, the disabled fire suppression system in the projection booth, the chained emergency exits, the inadequate staff training for emergency situations. The building's aging infrastructure and poor maintenance. Grand Vista Theaters faced criminal charges. The company's CEO and the theater's general manager were both charged with involuntary manslaughter. The corporation was fined millions of dollars and ultimately went bankrupt, unable to survive the combination of legal penalties, civil lawsuits from victims' families, and the complete loss of public trust. But no amount of legal accountability could change what happened on Christmas Day 2016. 32 people who'd planned to spend their holiday watching movies about friendship and courage died in a preventable fire. They died because a theater company prioritized preventing ticket fraud over fire safety. They died because emergency exits were chained shut. They died because safety systems were disabled and never reactivated. Among the dead were families, parents and children who'd made attending the marathon a Christmas tradition. A father and his 2 teenage sons, all 3 killed by smoke inhalation in the hallway outside Theater 7. A group of college students who'd driven 3 hours to attend, none of whom survived. An elderly couple in their 70s who'd been attending the marathon every year since it started. They were found in their seats, having been overcome by smoke before they could even attempt to evacuate. The survivors carry physical and psychological scars. Many suffer from survivors' guilt, wondering why they made it out when others didn't. They remember the chaos of the evacuation, the screaming, the smoke, the feeling of being trapped with flames above and crowds preventing escape. They remember seeing people fall and not being able to stop and help because the press of the crowd pushed them forward. They remember the moment they realized the emergency exits were chained, the despair of understanding that their escape routes were blocked. Louisville was devastated. The fire received national media coverage, became a case study in how corporate negligence and corner-cutting could turn routine activities into death traps. Building codes were strengthened nationwide. Fire safety inspections became more rigorous. Chaining emergency exits, which had been an open secret in many businesses, became something that was actually enforced against rather than overlooked. But those changes couldn't help the 32 people who died on December 25, 2016. Couldn't give back the Christmases their families would never have with them. Couldn't erase the fact that people who'd wanted nothing more than to enjoy a movie marathon on Christmas Day had died horrible deaths because a corporation valued profits over safety. The Grand Vista Theatre building was demolished in 2017. The site remained vacant for years. No developer wanted to build on ground where 32 people had died. Eventually, in 2020, the land was purchased by the city and converted into a memorial park. 32 trees were planted, one for each victim, with plaques bearing their names. Every Christmas, survivors and victims' families gather at the memorial park. They read the names of the dead. They share memories. They mark another year of living with the absence of people who should still be here. And they remember that December 25, 2016 was supposed to be a day of celebration, of shared joy over stories they loved, of community and tradition. Instead, it became a day of death and loss, a day when faulty wiring sparked a fire that revealed how thoroughly safety had been compromised in pursuit of profits. A day when chained emergency exits transformed a manageable situation into a catastrophe. A day when 87 people entered a movie theater and only 55 came out alive. The Lord of the Rings marathon hasn't been held anywhere since 2016. The tradition died with the Grand Vista Theatre fire. Fans who used to attend marathons across the country decided they couldn't continue, couldn't sit through 12 hours of movies without thinking about the people who died trying to do exactly that. Christmas Day 2016 showed that danger can emerge anywhere, that routine activities can turn deadly when safety is compromised, and that corporate negligence has real victims with names and families and futures that were stolen. 32 people went to watch movies about heroes fighting evil. They died because the real evil, greed, negligence, disregard for human life, was working behind the scenes, creating conditions that would kill them. Their names are remembered. Their deaths prompted changes, but they're still gone, and their families still face every Christmas knowing that the holiday will forever be associated with loss, with the fire that took their loved ones, with the knowledge that those deaths were preventable and shouldn't have happened. The Grand Vista Theatre fire stands as one of the deadliest Christmas Day incidents in modern American history. Not an act of terrorism or deliberate violence, but something perhaps worse. Deaths caused by mundane corporate negligence, by cost-cutting measures, by the gradual erosion of safety standards in pursuit of slightly higher profits. Deaths that could have been prevented by properly installed wiring, by activated fire suppression systems, by unlocked emergency exits. Deaths that serve as a permanent reminder that safety regulations exist for reasons written in blood, and that ignoring those regulations has consequences measured in human lives lost. Story 3. The Hiking Disappearance. Michael and Jennifer Russo were experienced hikers who'd been together for 6 years. On Christmas Day 2018, they decided to hike Mount Baldy in Southern California, a challenging but popular trail that offered spectacular views and was typically busy even on holidays. Both were fit, experienced with winter hiking, and properly equipped with appropriate gear, GPS devices, and emergency supplies. They began their hike at 7:15 a.m. on December 25, 2018, planning to summit and return before dark. The weather forecast was favorable. Clear skies, temperatures in the mid-40s at the trailhead, colder at elevation, but nothing that concerned them. Mount Baldy was 10,064 feet high, and the trail was approximately 14 miles round trip with significant elevation gain. Michael and Jennifer checked in with Jennifer's sister via text at 7:30 a.m., confirming they'd started the hike and would check in again when they reached the summit. They estimated they'd summit around 11:00 a.m. and be back at their car by 3:00 p.m. Other hikers on the trail that day reported seeing Michael and Jennifer at various points during their ascent. A couple passed them around 8:45 a.m. at approximately 7,000 feet elevation. A solo hiker exchanged greetings with them at 9:30 a.m. near 8,500 feet. Everyone who encountered them reported they seemed in good spirits, properly equipped, moving at a reasonable pace. At 11:47 a.m., Jennifer texted her sister, "We're near the summit. Views are incredible. We'll send photos from the top. See you tonight." That was the last communication anyone received from Michael or Jennifer. When they didn't return by 4:00 p.m., Jennifer's sister tried calling both their cell phones. No answer. She texted, no response. By 6:00 p.m., with darkness falling and still no word, she called the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department to report the couple overdue from their hike. Search and rescue teams were deployed immediately. Mount Baldy was known for its dangers, unpredictable weather, steep terrain, and several deaths over the years. But conditions on Christmas Day 2018 remained favorable. No storms, no sudden weather changes that might explain why experienced hikers would fail to return on schedule. Searchers found Michael and Jennifer's car at the trailhead locked and undisturbed. They hiked the trail, calling the couple's names, using searchlights to scan the area. The search continued through the night and into December 26th. At 9:23 a.m. on December 26th, searchers found Michael Russo's body at approximately 9,200 feet elevation, about 800 feet below the summit. He had fallen from the trail, tumbled down a steep slope, and died from massive head trauma. His GPS device showed he'd reached the summit at 11:52 a.m. the previous day, consistent with Jennifer's text message timing. But Jennifer wasn't with him. Her body wasn't near Michael's. Searchers expanded their efforts, checking the entire area around where Michael had fallen, searching downslope in case Jennifer had also fallen but landed in a different location. They found no trace of Jennifer Russo. No body, no equipment, no signs of where she'd gone. It was as if she'd simply vanished from the mountain. The investigation tried to reconstruct what had happened. The evidence suggested Michael and Jennifer had reached the summit successfully around 11:50 a.m. They'd begun their descent. At some point, Michael had fallen, whether due to a slip on icy trail, a misstep, or some other cause was unclear. The fall had been fatal and his body had come to rest on a slope below the trail. But what happened to Jennifer? The most logical explanation was that she'd also fallen, and her body had tumbled further down the mountain into terrain that searchers hadn't yet covered. But extensive searches over the following days found nothing. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the mountain. Ground teams covered every possible route Jennifer could have taken. No trace was ever found, no body, no equipment, no footprints leading away from where Michael had fallen. Jennifer Russo had disappeared from Mount Baldy on Christmas Day 2018, and despite massive search efforts involving hundreds of volunteers and professional rescuers, she was never located. Theories proliferated. Some believed Jennifer had fallen into a crevasse or snow-covered area where her body was hidden from searchers. Others thought she might have survived the initial incident but became disoriented, wandered off the main trail, and died from exposure in a location searchers hadn't checked. A darker theory suggested Jennifer might have survived her husband's fall, panicked, and hiked out a different route, becoming lost in the process. That she might have died alone somewhere on the mountain trying to find her way back to civilization. The most disturbing theory, proposed by some who studied the case carefully, was that Jennifer's disappearance wasn't accidental at all. That something else had happened on the mountain that day, something that explained why Michael fell and why Jennifer vanished without a trace. This theory pointed to the timing. Michael and Jennifer were near the summit around noon on Christmas Day. The mountain was busy with other hikers, yet no one reported seeing them at the summit itself. No one saw them begin their descent. The last confirmed sighting was at 9:30 a.m., over 2 hours before they reached the top. What happened during those 2 hours? Did they encounter someone at the summit? Did something occur that led to Michael's fatal fall and Jennifer's disappearance? Jennifer's GPS device was never found. Her cell phone was never recovered. All of her equipment vanished with her. If she'd fallen, her gear should have been scattered along her fall path, should have been visible to searchers, but nothing was ever located. Her bank accounts and credit cards were never accessed after December 25, 2018. Her social media accounts went silent. There were no signs she'd voluntarily disappeared or was alive somewhere. Every piece of evidence suggested she died on Mount Baldy on Christmas Day. But without a body, without any physical evidence, her fate remained officially undetermined. The search for Jennifer Russo continued for weeks, then months. Her family offered rewards for information. Psychics and amateur sleuths descended on Mount Baldy, claiming they could help locate her remains. Professional search teams returned multiple times, covering the mountain systematically. Nothing was ever found. It was as if Jennifer had been erased from existence somewhere between the summit of Mount Baldy and the location where her husband's body was discovered. 700 vertical feet and an unknowable distance horizontally. Somewhere in that space, Jennifer Russo ceased to exist in any form that searchers could detect. Her disappearance became one of the most puzzling missing persons cases in California history. Experienced hikers don't simply vanish. Bodies don't hide so completely that professional searchers with dogs and thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar can't find them. Equipment doesn't disappear without a trace, yet that's exactly what happened to Jennifer Russo. On Christmas Day 2018, she hiked to the summit of Mount Baldy with her boyfriend. Hours later, his body was found. She was gone, leaving no trace, no clues, no evidence of what had befallen her. Michael Russo's family buried him in January 2019. Jennifer's family held a memorial service, but without a body, without confirmation of death, there was no burial. Legally, Jennifer remains a missing person. Her case is still open, tips are still investigated. But as of 2024, 6 years after her disappearance, no evidence has ever emerged to explain what happened to her. Some searchers believe her body remains on Mount Baldy, hidden in terrain that's incredibly difficult to search. Perhaps in a crack or crevasse, perhaps buried under rockfall, perhaps in an area so remote or dangerous that even experienced searchers haven't adequately covered it. They believe eventually she'll be found, that time and erosion will reveal what dozens of searches couldn't uncover. Others believe she's not on the mountain at all. That somehow, in ways no one has been able to explain, Jennifer left Mount Baldy on December 25, 2018. Whether through voluntary disappearance, foul play, or circumstances too bizarre to credit, she's somewhere other than where everyone has been looking. The truth remains unknown. What's certain is that 2 people started a Christmas Day hike together. One fell to his death. The other vanished so completely that 6 years of searching has produced nothing. No answers, no closure, just absence where a person used to be. Jennifer's family still marks Christmas, but the holiday is forever tainted by her disappearance. Every December 25th, they think about her last text message. "Views are incredible. We'll send photos from the top. See you tonight." They think about how that promise was never fulfilled, how she never came home, how she disappeared into thin air on a mountain that hundreds of people have searched without finding any trace of her. Mount Baldy claims lives regularly. Experienced hikers die there every year from falls, exposure, avalanches. But Jennifer Russo's case stands apart because her death, if she died, left no evidence. Her disappearance violated the basic principle that people leave traces, that bodies can be found, that searches eventually produce results. Unless something extraordinary happened. Unless the combination of terrain, timing, and unknown factors created circumstances where a person could genuinely vanish without a trace. Or unless the explanation for her disappearance is something no one has considered, something that exists outside the framework of typical mountain accidents. Christmas Day 2018 took 2 lives, one through a fall that left clear evidence, one through disappearance that remains inexplicable. Michael Russo's family has closure, painful as it is. Jennifer's family has only questions, absence, and the permanent wound of not knowing what happened to someone they loved. The case remains open. Searchers occasionally return to Mount Baldy, hoping that a new search technique or a changed landscape will reveal what's been hidden for 6 years. But with each passing year, the likelihood of finding answers decreases. And Jennifer Russo's Christmas Day Disappearance becomes more firmly established as one of those mysteries that defies explanation, that reminds us how much we don't know about what can happen to people in wild places, that demonstrates how quickly someone can transition from life to absence without leaving evidence that explains the transition. Story 4. The Family Accident. The Westbrook family, parents Dale and Karen and their 3 children ages 12, 9, and 6, left their home in Austin, Texas on Christmas morning 2017 to drive to Karen's parents' house in Houston. It was a trip they'd made dozens of times, approximately 165 miles on Interstate 10, usually taking about 2.5 hours. They'd planned to arrive by noon for Christmas lunch with Karen's extended family. Dale was driving their Honda Odyssey minivan. Traffic was light on Christmas morning. Most people had already reached their destinations the previous day. Weather conditions were clear and dry. Nothing suggested this routine holiday drive would be anything other than uneventful. At 10:47 a.m., approximately 90 minutes into their drive and about 50 miles west of Houston, Dale lost control of the minivan. According to witnesses in other vehicles, the minivan suddenly swerved across multiple lanes of traffic, overcorrected, and flipped multiple times before coming to rest on the side of the highway. Emergency services arrived within minutes. The scene was catastrophic. The minivan had rolled at least 4 times. All 5 family members were injured, some critically. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize the victims and transport them to the nearest trauma center. Dale Westbrook died at the scene from massive chest trauma. Karen died in the ambulance en route to the hospital. The 12-year-old daughter died in the emergency room despite desperate efforts to save her. The 9-year-old son died during surgery. Only the 6-year-old daughter survived, and she was left with severe brain damage, permanent disability, and no memory of the accident or the moments before it. 4 members of the Westbrook family died on Christmas Day 2017 because their minivan crashed on I-10. The sole survivor was a 6-year-old girl who would never fully recover, who would spend the rest of her life in the care of relatives, unable to live independently, unable to remember her parents or siblings who died with her in that crash. The investigation into the accident initially focused on mechanical failure. Had something broken on the minivan that caused Dale to lose control? but examination of the vehicle found no mechanical defects. The tires were properly inflated and showed no signs of blowout. The brakes were functional. The steering system was intact. There was no evidence of any mechanical issue that would explain the sudden loss of control. Investigators considered medical emergency. Had Dale suffered a heart attack or stroke while driving? But autopsy results showed no evidence of cardiac event, no stroke, no seizure, no medical condition that would have caused sudden incapacity. Dale had been healthy, had no known medical issues that would explain suddenly losing control of his vehicle. Distracted driving was considered. Had Dale been using his phone, been distracted by something in the vehicle? Phone records showed no calls or texts at the time of the crash. Dashboard camera footage from a vehicle traveling behind the Westbrook minivan showed Dale driving normally in the moments before the crash. No signs of distraction, no indication he was looking at a phone or was inattentive to the road. That same dashboard camera footage captured the crash itself, and what it showed was deeply disturbing. In the moments before losing control, the minivan's brake lights illuminated. Dale was braking. Then the minivan suddenly accelerated, speeding up dramatically despite the brake lights remaining on, and swerved across traffic as if the steering had been jerked hard to the left. It looked like two things were happening simultaneously. Dale was braking, trying to slow or stop the vehicle, while the minivan was accelerating and turning sharply. As if the vehicle was responding to commands Dale wasn't giving, as if control had been taken away from the driver. Investigators expanded their focus to electronic systems. Modern vehicles are controlled by computers that manage everything from acceleration to steering. Could the minivan's electronic systems have malfunctioned, causing it to accelerate and turn despite Dale's attempts to brake? Honda engineers examined the recovered vehicle computer systems. They found something that shocked them. In the moments before the crash, the minivan's computer had received acceleration and steering commands consistent with what was observed. Hard acceleration and sharp left turn. But those commands didn't come from Dale's physical actions on the pedals and steering wheel. They came from somewhere else. The minivan had been hacked. Someone had remotely accessed the vehicle's computer systems and had sent commands that overrode Dale's control, that forced the vehicle to accelerate and turn despite Dale braking and trying to maintain control. Someone had deliberately crashed the Westbrook family's minivan, killing 4 people and destroying a family on Christmas Day 2017. The FBI became involved, investigating the hack as a potential act of terrorism or targeted attack. They examined the minivan's computer systems in detail, traced the source of the unauthorized commands, tried to identify who had hacked the vehicle and why. The investigation revealed that the hack had been executed through the minivan's entertainment system, which had internet connectivity for streaming music and navigation. A vulnerability in the system's security had been exploited, allowing someone to gain access to the deeper vehicle systems that controlled acceleration and steering. But identifying who had done it proved impossible. The hack had been routed through multiple proxy servers and encrypted networks. The attacker had covered their tracks expertly. The FBI's cyber crimes unit, despite extensive investigation, couldn't definitively identify the hacker or determine their motive. 2 theories emerged. The first was that this was a random attack, a demonstration of capability by a hacker or hacking group showing they could remotely control vehicles. The Westbrook family had been chosen at random, killed not because of who they were, but simply because they happened to be driving a vehicle with vulnerable systems that a hacker wanted to exploit. The second theory was more targeted, that someone had deliberately chosen the Westbrook family, had hacked their specific vehicle, had waited for an opportunity to cause a crash that would kill them. This theory suggested the crash was murder disguised as an accident, that the 4 deaths were intentional rather than collateral damage from a random demonstration. investigators found no evidence supporting the targeted theory. The Westbrooks were ordinary people with no known enemies. Dale worked in commercial real estate. Karen was a teacher. They had no involvement in anything that would make them targets for this kind of sophisticated attack. If they'd been deliberately chosen, the motive remained completely unclear. The random attack theory seemed more plausible but was in some ways more disturbing. It meant a family of 5 could be wiped out on Christmas Day not because of anything they'd done or any enemy they'd made, but simply because they were driving a vehicle whose computer systems a hacker wanted to exploit. It meant their deaths were meaningless, random, an arbitrary demonstration of technical capability that happened to require killing real people. Honda issued a recall for the affected model, patching the vulnerability that had been exploited. Other manufacturers reviewed their vehicle security systems, improving protections against remote access. But these changes couldn't help the Westbrook family. The sole survivor, 6-year-old Sophia Westbrook, was raised by Karen's parents. They never told her what had happened to her family. She was too young to understand, and her brain damage made complex explanations impossible. She knows she was in an accident. She knows her parents and siblings died, but she doesn't know that someone deliberately crashed their vehicle, doesn't know that her family was killed either randomly or as specific targets, doesn't know that their Christmas Day drive to her grandparents' house was interrupted by a hacker who seized control of their minivan and killed 4 of 5 people inside. The case technically remains open, but the FBI has exhausted investigative leads. The hacker was never identified. Their motive, whether random or targeted, was never determined. The vulnerability that allowed the hack has been patched, making similar attacks more difficult. But the person who killed the Westbrook family has never faced justice, has never been identified, may not even realize or care that their demonstration of hacking capability killed 4 people and destroyed a 6-year-old's life. Christmas Day 2017 was supposed to be a joyful family gathering for the Westbrooks. Instead, it became the day that 4 people died because modern vehicles are computers on wheels. Because those computers can be hacked. Because security vulnerabilities exist in systems that control devices capable of killing people. Karen's parents mark every Christmas with grief for the daughter, son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren they lost. They care for Sophia as best they can, but she's not the child she would have been. The brain damage has left her with significant cognitive and physical disabilities. The 6-year-old who survived the crash will never be independent, will never fully understand what happened to her family, will never have the future she should have had. And somewhere, the person who hacked the Westbrook minivan goes unpunished. They live their life knowing they killed 4 people, or perhaps not thinking about it at all, perhaps having moved on to other demonstrations of their technical capabilities, perhaps not caring that their actions had consequences measured in destroyed lives. The Westbrook family crash demonstrated a new category of danger in the modern world, remote vehicle hacking resulting in deliberate crashes. It prompted security improvements and raised awareness of vulnerabilities in vehicle computer systems. But it also showed that technological advances create new ways to kill people, new methods of attack that are difficult to defend against and nearly impossible to trace. 4 people died on Christmas Day 2017 because someone somewhere decided to hack a minivan driving on I-10 in Texas. Whether those 4 people were targeted or random victims, whether their killer even knew who they were killing, remains unknown. What's certain is that a family was destroyed, a 6-year-old's future was stolen, and Christmas will forever be marked by grief for those who loved the Westbrooks. Story 5. The Basement Discovery. The Martinez family purchased their home in suburban Philadelphia in November 2013. It was a spacious 4-bedroom colonial built in 1978, perfect for their growing family. Parents Roberto and Linda, and their 3 children ages 8, 5, and 3. They moved in 3 weeks before Christmas, excited about celebrating their first holiday in their new home. The house had a full basement that was partially finished. One section had been converted into a recreation room, while the other section remained unfinished storage space. The unfinished section had concrete walls, exposed beams, and a dirt floor in one corner where the previous owners apparently had been planning to dig for additional foundation work but never completed the project. On Christmas morning 2013, the Martinez family opened presents in their living room. After the excitement settled, 8-year-old Marco asked his father if he could get his basketball from the basement where it had been stored. Roberto told him to go ahead, and Marco went downstairs at approximately 9:15 a.m. 2 minutes later, Marco was screaming. Roberto and Linda rushed to the basement to find their son standing at the entrance to the unfinished section, pointing at the dirt floor area and crying hysterically. The dirt had been disturbed. Something was partially exposed, and what was exposed was clearly human. Bones, remnants of fabric, the unmistakable evidence of human remains that had been buried in the basement of the Martinez family's new home. Roberto called 911 immediately. Police arrived within 15 minutes, followed shortly by forensic investigators and the county medical examiner. The Martinez family was moved to a hotel while investigators secured the home as a crime scene. Over the next 3 days, forensic anthropologists carefully excavated the basement. What they found was horrifying. The remains of not one but 4 individuals had been buried in the dirt floor of the unfinished basement section. 3 adults and 1 child, based on the skeletal measurements. All had been there for years. Initial estimates suggested 10 to 15 years based on the state of decomposition and the condition of the fabric remnants buried with the bodies. All 4 individuals had been murdered. The skeletal remains showed evidence of blunt force trauma, knife wounds, and in one case, a bullet still embedded in the skull. These weren't natural deaths that had been hidden. These were homicides buried in a residential basement hidden for over a decade. The discovery shocked the Philadelphia area. 4 murder victims had been buried in a house that had been occupied by families, that had been sold multiple times, that had been home to children playing and families celebrating holidays, and no one had known. The bodies had been there all along, buried just feet below where people lived their normal lives. Investigation revealed the house had belonged to Gerald and Patricia Hartman from 1992 to 2003. The Hartmans had sold the house and moved to Arizona, where Gerald died in 2008 and Patricia in 2011. They were the most likely suspects for having buried the bodies, given the timeline and their ownership during the period when the murders likely occurred. But with both Hartmans dead, direct confrontation was impossible. Investigators searched Arizona records, interviewed people who'd known the couple, looked for any evidence that might explain who the 4 victims were and why they'd been killed and buried in a basement in Philadelphia. Dental records and DNA analysis eventually identified 3 of the 4 victims. 2 were women who'd been reported missing in the late 1990s. 1 from Philadelphia, 1 from New Jersey. Both had last been seen in circumstances that suggested they might have been involved in prostitution or drug activity, which explained why their disappearances hadn't received extensive investigation at the time. The 3rd identified victim was a man who'd been reported missing in 2001. He'd been a traveling salesman who'd disappeared during a business trip. His family had filed missing person reports, but without evidence of foul play, the case had gone nowhere. The 4th victim, the child, was never identified. Dental records produced no matches. DNA testing found no familial connections in available databases. The child, estimated to be between 8 and 10 years old at time of death, remains unidentified to this day. They were buried in the basement, murdered alongside 3 adults, and no one knows who they were or why they died. Investigation into Gerald Hartman's background revealed concerning information. He'd worked as a contractor doing basement renovations and foundation work. He had access to people's homes, had skills relevant to digging and concealing burial sites. And several other properties he'd worked on were flagged for investigation, though no additional remains were found. The theory investigators developed was that Hartman had killed the victims over a period of years, possibly targeting vulnerable people who wouldn't be extensively searched for. The prostitutes, the traveling salesman, and the unidentified child might have been victims of opportunity. People Hartman encountered and killed for reasons that died with him. But without being able to question Hartman or his wife, without finding clear evidence connecting him to the murders beyond the fact that the bodies were buried in his basement, the investigation hit a wall. Officially, the murders remain unsolved. Unofficially, investigators are confident Hartman was responsible, but they can't prove it to the standard required for justice. For the Martinez family, the discovery destroyed their home and their sense of security. They never moved back into the house, couldn't imagine living in a place where 4 murder victims had been buried. The house was sold at auction, purchased by investors who demolished it entirely and built new construction on the site. But the psychological damage to the Martinez family, particularly to Marco, who discovered the remains, was permanent. Marco developed severe anxiety and PTSD, spent years in therapy, still struggles with nightmares about what he saw that Christmas morning. The family's first Christmas in their new home became associated with death and horror, with the discovery of bones in their basement, with the knowledge that they'd been living above murder victims. The unidentified child haunts everyone involved in the case. Somewhere, someone is missing a child who disappeared in the late 1990s or early 2000s. Someone lost a son or daughter who was murdered and buried in a basement in Philadelphia. But that family has never been found. No missing person report matches. No DNA connects to any known relatives. The child remains nameless, a victim whose identity may never be recovered. Christmas Day 2013 began with presents and joy for the Martinez family. It ended with the discovery of 4 murder victims buried in their basement, with their home becoming a crime scene, with the loss of any sense of safety or security in the house they'd purchased. A day that should have been about celebration became about death, about the disturbing knowledge that murder victims had been buried just feet below where they'd been living. The case remains open. Investigators still hope to identify the 4th victim, still hope to find definitive evidence connecting Gerald Hartman to the murders. But with each passing year, the likelihood of answers decreases, and the 4 victims buried in that basement become more firmly established as a mystery that may never be fully solved. What's known is that 4 people were murdered and buried in a residential basement, that their remains went undiscovered for over a decade while multiple families lived in the house above them. That on Christmas Day 2013, an 8-year-old boy went to get his basketball and found human bones instead. That discovery ruined his Christmas, traumatized him permanently, and revealed a horror that had been hidden in plain sight for years. 4 victims, one still unidentified, a killer who likely died before facing justice, and a family whose Christmas was destroyed by what they found buried beneath their new home. December 25, 2013 became a day the Martinez family will never forget, a reminder that homes have histories, that evil can be hidden beneath our feet, and that sometimes holiday celebrations are interrupted by discoveries of horrors we never knew existed.